Ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about love, we often imagine something nurturing, kind, and safe. True love uplifts and strengthens. But sometimes, what appears to be love on the surface is something far more damaging underneath. Emotional manipulation is one of the clearest signs that what you're experiencing is not love. It's control dressed as affection. It's a psychological tactic used by individuals to influence or dominate others by playing on their emotions. When emotional manipulation is present, it poisons the relationship from the inside out, leaving one partner confused, drained, and doubting their own worth. One of the most dangerous aspects of emotional manipulation is how subtle it can be. It doesn't always come in the form of yelling or overt criticism. Often, it hides behind fake conserving, guilt, gaslighting, or conditional affection. A manipulator may pretend to care deeply about you, but their care is only extended when it benefits them. You might find yourself constantly trying to prove your love, walking on eggshells, or changing who you are just to avoid conflict. If you're always sacrificing your needs while the other person rarely compromises, that's not love. It's manipulation. Gaslighting is a common form of emotional manipulation, and it's especially harmful. It involves making someone question their reality, their memory, or their sanity. A manipulator might say, "You're too sensitive," or "that never happened," when confronted with hurtful behavior. Over time, this kind of response can make you question your own instincts and experiences. When your emotions are invalidated again and again, you start to feel lost and dependent on the very person who is hurting you. It isn't love, that's control. Another red flag is the use of guilt to shape your decisions. Manipulators will often frame their desires as your responsibility. You might hear, "If you really loved me, you'd do this." Or, "After everything I've done for you, how can you say no?" These statements are not expressions of love, they're tools of caution. Real love allows for freedom of choice and mutual respect. Emotional manipulation does the opposite. It takes away your power and replaces it with obligation. True love brings peace, but emotional manipulation brings confusion and anxiety. If you constantly feel emotionally exhausted, anxious about upsetting your partner, or uncertain about your own thoughts and feelings, it's time to question whether the relationship is rooted in genuine love. Healthy love supports personal growth and encourages open communication. In contrast, emotional manipulation silences your voice and gradually strips away your identity. One of the most painful realizations is understanding that someone you care about may not be capable of offering real love. They may only know how to manipulate because of their own unresolved wounds, but that doesn't mean you should stay and suffer. Recognizing emotional manipulation is the first step toward healing. It means facing the hard truth that it's not love, even if it looks like it from the outside. When you begin to set boundaries, speak your truth, and reclaim your self-worth, you break free from the manipulator's grip. You start to recognize your value and what real love should feel like. Safe, empowering, and honest. Emotional manipulation has no place in a loving relationship, and walking away from it isn't a failure. It's an act of self-respect and a declaration that you deserve better. Love doesn't trap you, confuse you, or make you feel small. Love liberates. So if what you're experiencing feels like emotional manipulation, know this: it's not love, and you have every right to choose yourself and walk away. Toxic attachment is often mistaken for love, especially when emotions run deep and bonds are intense. But intensity does not equal intimacy, and emotional dependency does not equal affection. When someone says, "I can't live without you," it may sound romantic, but in the context of toxic attachment, it reveals an unhealthy dynamic. Love is not about clinging, controlling, or fearing abandonment at every turn. Those are symptoms of a toxic bond, not a loving one. In a healthy relationship, love is a choice, not a need. It is built on mutual respect, trust, and freedom. Toxic attachment, however, stems from unresolved wounds, fear of abandonment, and deep insecurity. It creates a dynamic where one or both partners become emotionally dependent, often mistaking their anxiety for passion and their control for care. When someone clings to you, not because they value your happiness, but because they fear being alone, that's not love, it's possession. Toxic attachment often begins with a whirlwind of emotion. It can feel like a soulmate connection, or meant to be, in the beginning because it moves fast and feels intense. But over time, that intensity becomes suffocating. One partner may start to isolate the other, demand constant reassurance, or become jealous and controlling. You may find yourself feeling more like a caretaker than a partner, constantly trying to fix their moods or avoid triggering their insecurities. Another trait of toxic attachment is the inability to set healthy boundaries. In real love, boundaries are respected and encouraged. But in toxic relationships, boundaries are seen as threats. If you try to take space or focus on yourself, the other person might guilt-trip you, accuse you of not caring, or emotionally punish you. This fear of setting boundaries keeps you trapped in a cycle of pleasing and pacifying. Over time, you lose yourself. In such dynamics, the relationship becomes your entire identity. Your self-worth becomes tied to how the other person feels about you. If they're happy, you feel secure. If they're upset, you feel worthless. This emotional dependency is incredibly draining and often leads to anxiety, depression, and a sense of powerlessness. When your peace is constantly at the mercy of someone else's emotional state, that's not love. It's toxicity. What makes toxic attachment so dangerous is that it's often wrapped in the language of love. I'm only like this because I care so much. Or, I just don't want to lose you. Are phrases that sound loving but are often used to justify control, manipulation, and codependency. Real love supports freedom and individuality. It allows room for growth, even if that growth involves some distance. Toxic attachment, on the other hand, seeks to possess and confine. Healing from toxic attachment requires deep self-awareness. It means acknowledging that what you thought was love might have been fear, trauma, or insecurity in disguise. It requires inner work, building your self-worth, learning to regulate your own emotions, and embracing the idea that you are whole on your own. Letting go of toxic attachment is painful, but it's also freeing. It opens the door to real, nourishing love. Love that empowers instead of controls, and uplifts instead of drains. It's not love if it costs you your peace, your identity, or your ability to thrive. If you're constantly sacrificing your mental and emotional health just to hold on to someone, you're not in love. You're in a toxic attachment. Recognizing the difference is the first step toward reclaiming your freedom, your self-respect, and your ability to experience true, healthy love. Let go of what hurts you, so you can make space for what heals you. Codependency is often mistaken for deep love or loyalty, but in reality, it is an unhealthy emotional reliance on another person. When someone is codependent, they place another person's needs, emotions, and well-being above their own, often to the point of losing their identity. In the context of relationships, codependency can feel like love, especially in the beginning. It looks like devotion, sacrifice, and support. But over time, it drains you, traps you, and breaks you down. That's because codependency isn't love. It's fear wrapped in attachment. At the root of codependency is a fear of abandonment. Many people who fall into codependent patterns have experienced emotional neglect, rejection, or trauma in the past. They learned early on that their value came from being needed, helpful, or available. So in relationships, they overextend themselves, become emotionally enmeshed, and sacrifice their own needs just to keep the connection alive. This creates a lopsided dynamic where one person gives endlessly while the other takes without balance. One of the key signs of codependency is losing your sense of self in the relationship. You begin to shape your identity around the other person. What they want, how they feel, what they expect. Your emotions become dependent on their approval or attention. If they're happy, you feel validated. If they pull away, you spiral into self-doubt. This emotional dependency creates a cycle of neediness, insecurity, and control, none of which are components of real, healthy love. In a codependent relationship, boundaries don't exist or are constantly violated. You may struggle to say no, even when something hurts you, because you fear conflict or rejection. You might feel responsible for the other person's moods, actions, or well-being. This leads to emotional exhaustion because you're constantly managing another person's life while neglecting your own. True love encourages independence and supports individual growth. Codependency, on the other hand, thrives on enmeshment and control. Another red flag of codependency is the fixer mindset. You may feel like it's your job to save or heal your partner. You tolerate toxic behaviors, make excuses for them, and believe that if you just love them enough, they'll change. But love isn't about fixing. It's about mutual respect, shared responsibility, and growth. When your relationship feels like a project instead of a partnership, it's not love. It's codependency. Many people stay in codependent relationships because they fear being alone. They confuse attachment with affection and loyalty with love. But love should never cost you your peace, your confidence, or your voice. If you have to abandon yourself just to keep someone else, you're not in love. You're in emotional captivity. Real love allows both people to flourish independently and together. Codependency creates a cage where your worth is defined by how much you sacrifice. Healing from codependency requires inner work. It starts with recognizing the pattern, rebuilding self-worth, and learning to meet your own emotional needs. You must re-establish boundaries and embrace the truth that your value is not determined by your ability to be needed. Love is not about losing yourself. It's about being fully yourself and still being loved. Letting go of codependency doesn't mean letting go of love. It means making space for healthy, empowering love to enter your life. It means honoring your own emotions, standing in your own truth, and loving yourself enough to choose peace over fear. When you realize that you are whole on your own, you stop seeking completion in someone else. And that's when you truly understand it's not love if it costs you your soul. In relationships, recognizing red flags is essential to understanding whether what you're experiencing is genuine love or something harmful disguised as affection. Red flags are the warning signs, often subtle at first, that signal a relationship may not be healthy. When we ignore or overlook these signals, we run the risk of staying in situations that damage our self-worth, erode our emotional well-being, and keep us trapped in toxic cycles. In the context of the topic, it's not love. Red flags serve as clear indicators that what may feel like love could in fact be manipulation, control, or emotional dependency. One of the earliest red flags in a relationship is possessiveness disguised as care. For example, someone who constantly wants to know your whereabouts, checks your phone, or insists on being involved in every part of your life might claim they're just looking out for you. But real love is based on trust and respect, not surveillance or control. If your freedom starts shrinking in the name of love, that's a red flag. It's not love, it's insecurity masked as affection. Gaslighting is another major red flag. This occurs when someone manipulates you into questioning your own reality, emotions, or memories. They may deny things they've said or done, belittle your feelings, or twist the truth to make you feel like you're overreacting. This emotional manipulation creates confusion and self-doubt, and it's a tactic often used to gain control. True love validates your experience and listens to your concerns. When you feel crazy or constantly wrong in the relationship, it's not love. It's gaslighting. Love bombing is a red flag that can appear early in relationships. It's when someone overwhelms you with grand gestures, constant compliments, or extreme attention right away. While it might feel flattering at first, it's often a strategy to quickly gain emotional control. Once you're hooked, that intense affection may turn into criticism, withdrawal, or emotional abuse. Real love grows steadily and is built on consistency, not extremes. Another red flag is a lack of respect for your boundaries. If your partner pushes past your limits, whether they're emotional, physical, or personal, it shows a disregard for your autonomy. This could be anything from pressuring you into intimacy before you're ready, dismissing your opinions, or making decisions for you without consent. Love honors boundaries and seeks mutual understanding. If someone constantly crosses the lines you draw, it's not love, it's control. Emotional unavailability is also a common red flag. If someone avoids vulnerability, withholds affection, or shuts down communication whenever things get serious, it creates a one-sided relationship. You end up doing all the emotional labor, trying to fix, rescue, or reach them. But love is about connection and emotional reciprocity. If you feel alone even when you're with them, it's not love. It's emotional neglect. Jealousy and isolation are other subtle signs. If a partner tries to turn you against friends or family, claims you should only need them, or gets upset when you spend time with others, they're trying to isolate you. That's not protection, it's manipulation. Love encourages growth, independence, and supportive relationships outside of the partnership. A major red flag is when your self-esteem starts to suffer in the relationship. If you feel less confident, more anxious, or constantly criticized, it's time to reflect. Love should uplift, not diminish. If you find yourself losing your voice, changing who you are just to please them, or feeling like you're never enough, that is not love. That's emotional erosion. Recognizing red flags is not about being cynical. It's about protecting your heart and honoring your worth. A real love does not come with confusion, fear, or pain. It is respectful, kind, patient, and freeing. The moment you see that the relationship is hurting more than helping, draining more than nourishing, it's time to pause and ask yourself the hard question: is this really love, or just the illusion of it? False intimacy is one of the most deceptive and misunderstood experiences in relationships. It often feels like a deep, powerful connection. But in reality, it's a bond built on illusion, neediness, or emotional dependency rather than authentic love. When we explore the topic, it's not love. False intimacy stands out as a major red flag because it mimics the emotional closeness of real love while lacking the depth, trust, and mutual growth that true love requires. False intimacy typically forms quickly. You might feel an intense connection right away, as if you've known the person forever. There's a whirlwind of emotions, deep conversations in the early days, and a sense that you've finally found your soulmate. But this connection is often driven by unmet emotional needs, trauma bonding, or the desire to fill a void, not by genuine compatibility or emotional safety. One clear sign of false intimacy is emotional oversharing too soon. While vulnerability is essential in relationships, authentic intimacy takes time to build. When someone reveals their darkest secrets, childhood trauma, or deepest fears right at the start, it can create a sense of closeness that isn't truly earned. This fast-tracked vulnerability may be a subconscious attempt to secure attachment rather than foster trust. True love unfolds with patience and emotional maturity, not through urgency or pressure. False intimacy also often arises in codependent dynamics. In these relationships, both individuals may mistake emotional enmeshment for love. They rely on each other for validation, identity, or purpose, creating a bond that feels essential but is actually unhealthy. If your happiness depends entirely on the other person's mood or presence, it's not love, it's dependency. Love supports individuality, whereas false intimacy blurs the line between where you end and the other person begins. In many cases, false intimacy is used to mask underlying issues. A couple might avoid real problems by constantly clinging to one another, engaging in physical affection, or idealizing their relationship. The connection feels passionate, but it lacks substance. Conflicts are either avoided or escalated quickly, and the relationship may swing between extreme highs and devastating lows. This emotional volatility is mistaken for passion, but in truth, it's chaos. Love is steady, respectful, and rooted in understanding, not turbulence dressed up as romance. Another form of false intimacy happens when one or both people are trying to heal wounds through the relationship. You might be drawn to someone who mirrors unresolved pain from your past, creating what feels like a meaningful connection. In reality, the relationship becomes a reenactment of past trauma, not a healthy union. This is often referred to as a trauma bond, where pain, not love, is the glue. Healing doesn't come from recreating hurtful patterns, it comes from breaking them. False intimacy can also be perpetuated through fantasy rather than reality. You fall in love with the idea of someone or the potential you see in them, rather than who they truly are. You overlook red flags, excuse toxic behavior, and focus on what you hope the relationship will become. This illusion-based connection is not love. It's attachment to an ideal. Love accepts reality, while false intimacy clings to illusion. Perhaps the most telling sign of false intimacy is that you feel emotionally starved, even in their presence. You may constantly seek reassurance, validation, or effort that never truly comes. You give more than you receive. You feel exhausted, anxious, or afraid of losing them. In true love, there's mutual effort, peace, and emotional fulfillment, not a sense of lack. Recognizing false intimacy is not about shaming yourself. It's about becoming aware of what real love looks and feels like. Real love takes time, nurtures growth, and honors truth. If your relationship is based on intensity instead of intimacy, dependency instead of connection, or illusion instead of reality, then it's not love, it's false intimacy. And the sooner you realize that, the sooner you can begin to heal and make space for something real. Self-deception is one of the most common yet dangerous forces at play in relationships that aren't rooted in true love. When someone convinces themselves that what they are experiencing is love, despite clear signs that it's not, they enter a state of emotional blindness. This self-created illusion is a defense mechanism, one that shields the person from pain, fear of abandonment, or the truth they aren't ready to face. Under the topic, "It's not love," self-deception becomes a central theme, revealing how our minds can distort reality in order to hold on to something familiar, comforting, or idealized. The roots of self-deception often lie in unmet emotional needs, low self-worth, or past trauma. Many people convince themselves they are in love simply because they desperately want to be loved. They settle for crumbs of affection, mistaking them for a feast, because they've been conditioned to believe that's all they deserve. When you believe you aren't worthy of real, healthy love, you may tolerate mistreatment, indifference, or emotional unavailability and label it as passion or sacrifice. One of the most common ways self-deception shows up is through rationalizing red flags. You may see consistent disrespect, emotional inconsistency, or lack of support, but instead of confronting these truths, you justify them. "They're just going through a hard time," or "it's not always like this," becomes a narrative used to protect the illusion. You begin to gaslight yourself, questioning your instincts and emotions, all in an attempt to maintain a relationship that doesn't serve your emotional well-being. Self-deception also thrives in idealization. You fall in love not with the person in front of you, but with their potential, the version of them you hope they'll become. Maybe they showed you affection in the beginning, maybe they had moments of vulnerability, and you cling to those moments as proof that the relationship is meaningful. You ignore the long stretches of coldness, toxicity, or neglect because your mind keeps replaying the highlights like a loop of false hope. But love is consistent, not occasional. It shows up daily, not only when it's convenient. Another layer of self-deception lies in the fear of being alone. Many stay in unloving relationships simply because solitude feels more terrifying than disconnection. You tell yourself, "At least I have someone," or "all relationships are hard," using those thoughts as excuses to avoid the discomfort of letting go. But staying in something unhealthy is a slow emotional death. Real love doesn't trap you, it frees you. If you feel caged, silenced, or diminished, what you're in isn't love, and convincing yourself otherwise is only delaying your healing. Sometimes self-deception stems from external pressure, from culture, family, or society. You're told that being in a relationship is the ultimate goal, that love means enduring hardship without question. So you wear a mask, pretend to be happy, and ignore your intuition. You silence the part of you that knows the truth because you're afraid of judgment, of starting over, or of appearing like a failure. But true self-respect comes from living in alignment with truth, not appearance. The path out of self-deception begins with radical honesty. It requires looking at the relationship with clear eyes and asking, does this truly feel like love? Not the kind of love that movies or novels sell, but the kind rooted in peace, safety, respect, and mutual growth. Real love doesn't hurt more than it heals. It doesn't confuse you more than it comforts you. If you're constantly doubting, aching, or explaining away someone's behavior, you owe it to yourself to pause and reassess. Letting go of self-deception is hard because it means grieving not just the person, but the story you told yourself about them. But in that grief there is power. Because once the illusion dissolves, space is created. For self-love, for truth, and eventually, for a relationship that reflects your true worth. Because if it's not rooted in respect, growth, and emotional nourishment, then it's not love. It's just a story you're telling yourself to avoid the truth. When we talk about love, we often envision connection, understanding, mutual respect. However, not all relationships that appear as love truly are. One of the clearest indicators that what you're experiencing isn't love is the presence of unhealthy boundaries. True love respects space, autonomy, and individuality. Unhealthy boundaries, on the other hand, blur the line between connection and control, between intimacy and invasion. Under the lens of the topic, it's not love. Unhealthy boundaries emerge as a silent destroyer of emotional well-being and personal identity. In a relationship with unhealthy boundaries, the emotional landscape becomes confusing. One or both individuals may have trouble distinguishing where their needs end and the others begin. This lack of clarity can manifest in controlling behaviors, constant guilt-tripping, emotional dependence, or a complete loss of self. Many mistake these behaviors for passion or deep attachment. But love doesn't suffocate or demand complete fusion. It supports individuality within unity. One common form of unhealthy boundaries is emotional enmeshment. In this dynamic, one person's moods, feelings, and decisions dominate the relationship. You might feel responsible for their happiness or fear their reactions to your choices. Over time, your emotional state becomes tethered to theirs. This isn't love, it's emotional codependency. Real love encourages emotional independence. It allows space for disagreement, autonomy, and emotional expression without fear of punishment or withdrawal. Jealousy and possessiveness are also red flags of unhealthy boundaries, often mistaken for love. If your partner needs to control who you talk to, where you go, or what you wear, it's not because they love you. It's because they are insecure and attempting to manage you to feel safe. True love is built on trust, not surveillance. When boundaries are healthy, both partners feel secure in their freedom and trust in their connection. Another sign of unhealthy boundaries is the inability to say no without consequences. In toxic dynamics, asserting your needs or refusing something may be met with anger, manipulation, or guilt-tripping. You might find yourself constantly giving in, silencing your voice, or walking on eggshells to maintain peace. Love is not built on fear. When someone truly loves you, they respect your no, just as much as they celebrate your yes. You should not have to sacrifice your comfort to maintain someone else's. Unhealthy boundaries can also show up as lack of privacy or autonomy. If you're expected to share every detail of your life, give up your time, or mold your identity to fit their expectations, the relationship becomes a form of control. Healthy love gives room to grow as an individual. It celebrates your personal journey and does not demand that you lose yourself in the process of being together. Furthermore, self-abandonment is a subtle yet dangerous consequence of poor boundaries. You may begin to ignore your own needs, values, or goals to keep the relationship intact. Over time, you forget who you are without them. But love does not ask you to betray yourself. If staying in the relationship means sacrificing your mental health, self-respect, or purpose, then it's not love, it's dependency masked as devotion. To escape the cycle of unhealthy boundaries, you must first recognize that love and control cannot coexist. Love is about freedom, not possession. It's about partnership, not power. You deserve a relationship where your voice matters, your choices are respected, and your individuality is honored. Setting healthy boundaries is not selfish. It's a declaration of self-worth. It teaches others how to treat you and sets the standard for the kind of love you're willing to accept. Remember, love that comes with conditions, manipulation, or the loss of self is not love. It's control wrapped in emotion. And no matter how familiar or comforting it may feel, if you're losing yourself to keep it, it's not love. It's time to reclaim your boundaries and recognize your value. When you're in a relationship, the line between love and control can sometimes blur, especially when emotions are intense and your desire to be close to someone is strong. But make no mistake, love and control are not the same. In fact, they are polar opposites. Understanding the difference between love and control is essential. Because many people stay in relationships that feel suffocating, manipulative, or emotionally draining, thinking what they're experiencing is love. But if you feel more restricted than supported, more anxious than safe, it's not love, it's control. Love is rooted in freedom, trust, and mutual respect. It allows space for each person to be themselves while growing together. Control, on the other hand, is rooted in fear, insecurity, and dominance. A controlling partner may disguise their behavior as caring or protective, but in reality, they are attempting to dominate your decisions, emotions, or identity in order to feel secure themselves. True love honors autonomy. It respects your choices, even when they differ from your partner's preferences. It doesn't demand that you change who you are, give up your dreams, or shrink your personality to make someone else feel comfortable. In contrast, a control insists on uniformity. It wants you to behave a certain way, speak a certain way, and live a certain way, all to fit someone else's idea of who you should be. That's not love. That's manipulation. When someone truly loves you, they celebrate your individuality. They don't compete with your confidence or silence your voice. They support your passions, respect your boundaries, and value your opinions. Controlling behavior, however, is often masked as concern. I just want what's best for you. Or, I know you better than you know yourself. It may seem affectionate at first, but over time, these patterns strip away your independence and self-worth. A big difference between love and control is how conflict is handled. Love encourages open dialogue, vulnerability, and compromise. Control demands obedience, avoids accountability, and uses anger, guilt, or silence as weapons. If you're afraid to speak your truth, set a boundary, or express your needs because of how your partner might react, you're likely dealing with control, not love. Control often hides behind the illusion of intensity. Fast-moving relationships, extreme jealousy, and constant contact might feel flattering at first. But these behaviors are about ownership, not intimacy. Love doesn't need to possess or monitor. It trusts, it gives space, it breathes. Control suffocates. It wants to know where you are, who you're with, and why. It needs to approve your every move. That is not affection. That is fear-based domination. Another indicator is how you feel over time. Love should make you feel safe, seen, and supported. If instead you feel drained, anxious, confused, or small, those are warning signs. A loving relationship lifts you up. A controlling relationship keeps you down to maintain power. It's important to recognize that control doesn't always come with harsh words or obvious threats. Sometimes, it comes wrapped in tension and gifts, anything to keep you emotionally dependent. But if your freedom is being traded for emotional validation, if your voice is slowly being silenced, if you're losing your identity in the name of closeness, then it's not love, it's control. To truly love and be loved, you must feel free. Free to grow, free to express yourself, and free to say no without fear of punishment. Love gives, control takes. Love empowers, control limits. So ask yourself, are you being nurtured or managed? Encouraged or restricted? Loved or controlled? The truth is, love never asks you to give up who you are. If it does, it's not love. And once you recognize the difference, you can choose relationships that honor your worth and walk away from those that confuse control with care. Because real love never needs to control, it only wants to grow.